Well, we've made it to an end of the other week. It is very late for me. It is literally 12:04 a.m. as I sit down and record this. But you need to know if Joaquin Torres is worth your keys or tokens in the final moments that you're going to be able to pick him up this week before we get a new card in Thunderbolt Thaddeus Rocks next week. So let's take a look at the data. I'll give you some decks that have been performing from a data perspective and other ideas, help you achieve your weekend missions that way. In addition to just talking about if this card is worth the resources in the final moments, starting with the data from Untapped. And this card is very unpopular, sitting at a popularity rate of 3.6, win rate just barely above average of 50.6, and a cube rate of 0.25. While, again, the data is kind of insignificant, like it doesn't have statistical significance behind it because of the limited quantity of games that goes into reporting this data and the larger meta that is unrepresented in untapped data, it is true that this card has not been a major hit as far as meta performance goes. I like seeing that people are trying it out. As a bounce lover, I like that people are trying bounce again and coming back to that, and I'm glad that the meta mindset is associating bounce with a potential deck and a potential archetype that can be performing. However, Joaquin Torres within that, to me, and the data here is underwhelming, like just barely sitting above a 50% win rate. My experience has been the same. So what is my experience based off of this? At the time, in my keys decision video at the beginning of the season, I gave it a 3-star rating. That's what this little squiggle is here. I'm keeping my rating the same at 3 stars, and I'm leaving the potential at 4, and this is why. Similar to what we said about what everyone said about Moonstone, that the more 1, 2, and 3 cost cards that are released, that are ongoing, the better Moonstone gets. The same way with every 6 cost card that's released, Hulkling gets better, believe it or not. Joaquin Torres, with every 1 drop that gets released, Joaquin gets better. And I really feel that the potential of Joaquin is actually limited by the number of 1 drops that benefit from him. Now, I think that he would be very, very interesting to try in a Blade-focused deck, so maybe a Dracula dump deck, right? Like, I don't think anybody has tried Blade on Joaquin Torres, but that's particularly interesting. We'll get to the decks where people are trying him in typical bounce, but as someone who has loved bounce, and I talked about my video on Joaquin, which I'm planning to make another one tomorrow, that bounce has really fallen off for me, and it's quite sad. It feels like it's just barely not enough. Like, it feels like that deck is 1 card or 1 or 2 buffs away from being meta relevant. Right now, it is truly just like the amount of games that I lose by 1 or 2 points. And it's not necessarily like, oh, the card isn't doing enough. Like, the card is doing what it's supposed to do, and I'm playing the deck well. It's just that the deck can't reach the power levels of these other decks, especially when something like Surtur is so meta dominant as it is right now. I do feel that we're going to get there. I think it's interesting to see how, like, the spotlight theme of anything is very Surtur Scar focused. 10 powered cards seem to be the rage. We lost the bounce card that was going to be Red Wing. So maybe we'll get something in the future. Maybe we'll get a nerf or a buff. I'm not sure. But it's so close. Like, the frustrating thing about Joaquin is that right now he doesn't feel great. He's okay, and when he works, it's phenomenal. That's how bounce is that it's very... well, actually, in the last 2 seasons, and now this one, bounce has been very challenging. It hasn't been quite enough. But when it works, it really, really works. And Joaquin fits within that bounce shell the same. And I'm talking about bounce the most in my experience with him because that's where I tried him, and that's where obviously he fits the most at home. Because where else are you going to put a card that repeats your on reveals of your 1 costs? So in that bounce archetype, it just... Joaquin fits with the rest of the experience that I've had with bounce over the last 2 seasons. He didn't raise it to another level, sadly. And in my experience in deck building, I really, really feel like it's because of the lack of 1 drops that truly benefit. Like, yes, Iceman on Joaquin Torres is phenomenal. I'm really kind of interested to actually try something in like a Ronin-based deck. I haven't gotten around to that yet. But outside of like the scaling cards, if you time it right, you have Hawkeye, which I think Hawkeye is kind of underrated in bounce. But you have Hawkeye, you have the basic arrow, I guess, from Kate Bishop, if you're running Kate Bishop in bounce. I've done that before. Rocket, obviously, Silver Sable, and then Nico if you get the spell right. And I feel like there's just one more one-cost card that we need to give you one more chance to have something on reveal in an effective way. The Hood, kind of, but then you got to deal with the Hood. Having demons is nice, but then your hand is full, so then bouncing is hard, right? The Hood comes with his own challenges in a bounce deck. All of that being said, I did, right before recording, get beat by a bounce deck. I'm gonna save my thoughts on my a little. I'm gonna talk about my experience a little bit more when I get to my deck. I like my personal deck ideas with him, and not just the database decks. But he hasn't felt amazing, but he has felt really fun. And there have been some games where like Nico was like 34 power or something, 32 power, something crazy like that. I don't even remember because of the amount of times that Nico was doubling. Or Rocket was like 16 powered or something crazy. Like Rocket gets huge. I think it was like 14. I can't imagine the math right now. Hawkeye getting up to 10 plus power, which is awesome. So he really, really does work. It's just not quite close enough. I'll save some more thoughts on that towards the end. I think that's unique to my experience. That's why he's not a 2-star card. Like, truly, my experience with him has been closer to a 2-star card, but in the way that he's been played against me and also looking at the data and just some philosophy, like not philosophies, just some ideas that I have that I'm going to talk about later when I get to my deck ideas. I'm leaving him at a 3-star card because I think he's good. Again, his potential has to be a 4-star card if we get more one on reveals that benefit from him. So let's take a look at the decks according to the data, give you some ideas of decks that you can play. And the number one deck based off of win rate is actually a Darkhawk deck. The video that I was planning on releasing on Friday I didn't get to, that will be tomorrow, is trying Joaquin Torres in Darkhawk deck, right? The biggest enabler of Darkhawk is Rock Slide because you get those 2 rocks. Well, you can make Korg a Rock Slide with Joaquin Torres. Like, it's the exact same cost, but more. Actually, it might be is Rock Slide a 4/6 now, or is it 4/5? Right. Either way, it's the same cost and almost identical power, but Korg can bounce easier, and you can get 3 or 4, 5 rocks even if you're really lucky with bouncing Korg, because you can play Korg on 1 and then you can bounce him and play him on 3, and then you can bounce him again and play him on 5, and then maybe somehow bounce him again and play him on 6 with Darkhawk. Right. Then you're getting tons of rocks, especially if those rocks are going on Joaquin Torres. So cool that a Darkhawk deck is performing. I've been wanting to play Darkhawk for the longest time. I'm excited to test out this deck. The next decks we have 3 bounce-based decks, again, sorted by win rate. The one that has the highest win rate is a Hitmonkey-based deck, so it's the one with Black Swan. It's the one with Agent Venom, right? Interesting that this one does not include Toxin. There is a version that you can see here that does include Toxin. It's almost the exact same thing, but instead of you swap out Iceman for Toxin. Sorry, I'm switching between the two quickly. However, its win rate is much lower. Well, not much lower, just a little bit lower. Its cube rate is higher. However, the amount of games that are played are dramatically higher. That being said, I don't think that this deck has been played 2,000 times in the last game. The way that Untapped worked is that if you have a deck that's named the same thing and you only change 1 card, it continues to count the stats that deck had before. It doesn't consider it a new thing. So there was probably some bounce decks of this exact thing that had a different 3-drop in, so that's how it's up to 2,000 games. So I personally think that this is the better version of bounce because, you really need more bouncing, if that makes sense. I think the cube rate reveals that as well, that this one's a little bit better. But win rate wise, and this is one if you're a little bit more budget. I know Toxin is a card that a lot of people don't have. However, this is a pretty expensive deck. You have Silver Sable, Nico, Black Swan, Agent Venom, Sage, Hitmonkey, and Joaquin. So nearly, I think actually exactly half your deck series 4 or 5 cards. However, pretty good win rate. Exciting to see Bounce performing and winning and getting cubes. Like, that's a pretty okay win rate. Better than my experience has been with both Hitmonkey and Bounce, which is really sad. More on that a little bit later, but there's the data for that one. The next one is not a Hitmonkey bounce deck. Instead of Hitmonkey, it has Cassandra Nova, and then instead of Agent Venom, instead of Black Swan, it has Iron Patriot, which is cool because Iron Patriot is just a phenomenal card. So really, really cool deck here. If you don't have Cassandra Nova, you can also include Sage, but bouncing Cassandra Nova is also kind of mean. So cool deck. I think that this one would be fun to try as well. and pretty good cube rate. This one I also talked about is before. It's the one I was switching between. It's a Hitmonkey one, but it has Toxic included instead of Iceman. So now we move out of bounce and we move sadly into mill. There are 3 versions of mill. I hate to say it, but it makes a lot of sense that Joaquin is included in mill, because especially when you have misery included, you can play those Yondus and those Icemans or those hoods early and then play Joaquin on that location and then play misery. And now you've gotten 3 on reveals from those cards, which is just brutal. It is awful to play against. I have my own complaints about mill, but nonetheless, it's a very meta-dominant archetype right now, and Joaquin is having his place in a specific versions of it because of his benefit that he gives by having a lot of hoods, having a lot of Iceman hits, having a lot of Yondu hits, those types of things. So, like I mentioned, there's 3 different versions of mill. This is the first one, which I thought was actually cool. As someone who loves Victoria Hand, I think that's one of the cards that sadly has been moved on from way too quickly. This one's cool, and my mind actually always goes there. Whenever you're playing the hood, is this a deck that can include Victoria Hand? Because if it can, that's a 1/8, which is crazy. So then because of that, you have cards like Maria Hill to also give you more cards to benefit from Victoria Hand, which makes sense. You wouldn't want to include Victoria Hand with the hood only. And Maria Hill benefits from Joaquin Torres. You can get 2 costs. So pretty straightforward deck there. This one, again, also a mill deck. It's interesting to me that this one that includes Victoria Hand does not include Iron Patriot, but this one that does not include Victoria Hand does include Iron Patriot. However, it's the standard version of mill that we've been seeing with the likes of the Hood and Yondu and Cable and Grandmaster. I'm trying to think what this one is missing that others have been running a lot. Killmonger, I guess this one does not have. And Death, surprising. Wow, actually, this one does not have Death. I actually feel like taking out Cable or Grandmaster or Iron Patriot. Iron Patriot probably would make the most sense to take out for Death. Surprising. But if you don't have Death, if you're waiting on that card, there you go. However, this has a lot of Series 4 and 5s with Fenris Wolf and Grandmaster and Iron Patriot, Joaquin, Baron Zemo, and Gladi and Misery. So if you don't have Death, but you have all these other cards, that would be surprising. However, something to point out is that these win rates are both below 50%, so not necessarily a great deck to play. Like, just, is it better to just play regular mill without Joaquin? Probably. And the cube rate on these are significantly low, probably because, as most people do when you're playing against mill and your deck's getting destroyed, you just retreat. It's not even fun. So let them have their cube and move on with their life. Like, that is... I'm so sick of playing against mill that if I see Yondu come down, okay, maybe they just have Yondu. But if Cable or Grandmaster comes after that, I'm just retreating. You can have your 1 cube. I don't even want to play a game against you. Like, it's just not fun. Maybe that's me being toxic. And then we have this version, which is, like a combination of the 2 things because it includes Iron Patriot and Killmonger and also Death. So, again, still pretty low cube rate. And then we have my decks, which I don't have one outside of these that are already here. The one that I had thought of was Darkhawk, and then one similar to this. I tried a few different versions of Bounce. I also have the one that I included in the video. I guess I can show that, so I will amend it. It is on the screen now under my deck. It's the one I include in the video. It was like a budget-based Bounce deck, and believe it or not, it has outperformed some of the more expensive Bounce decks. So sometimes just go simple. And to be fair, Angela is an extremely underrated card in Bounce. I'm learning now. I never thought of this before. I love Elsa. I have a deck that I've kept around that includes Elsa Bloodstone. One of my favorite cards. I think it's one of the funnest to play with. Never thought to include her in Bounce, but really, really cool idea to include in Bounce. So I recommend you play that deck. It's been really fun. Also, playing Mysterio is fun. So something I just want to talk about, and I'll include in this section, is that my experience with making decks, specifically the different Bounce decks I had, and specifically Hitmonkey, is that I feel like I'm kind of RNG cursed now. And I don't want this to be a complaining video. Maybe I'll make, if you're interested in my thoughts on RNG and specifically deck-based matchmaking, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll make another ranting video as they have now been labeled. But it's been really challenging to see that if I meander too far out of like my meta assigned deck, I just can't win. And I say that in a real, like, I am typically not someone who complains and feels like angered or frustrated by the game. Like I'm okay losing. However, what's been really, really frustrating is that I like playing multiple types of decks, even when I'm losing. But what's frustrating is it feels like I'm not losing because of a skill issue or whatever. it feels like I'm losing because the game is forcing me to lose because I'm not playing the deck it wants me to. And I say that because I even experimented. And I took some of the top performing decks, Scream decks, Doom 2099 decks that I personally don't like to play because they're not like strategic enough for me. They're not engaging enough, but they perform extremely well. And I tested those out. And I could not win with them. And yes, I don't pilot them very frequently, but they're not that hard to pilot. They're pretty straightforward. I also played them in the past when those cards were released, so I know how to play them. And they're played against me plenty enough that I know how to play them. And yet I lose very consistently. My opponent always has the exact counters that they need to shut me down, and I have horrible card draw. As an example, I love Mr. Negative decks. They have taken me to infinite many times before. One of my favorite archetypes to play in all of Snap. Like, genuinely love Mr. Negative. Played it many times. In my list of decks that are like the old, you know how the oldest decks are always the first decks? I have 3 decks that were like original decks since I came back to Marvel Snap, and I have not deleted them. And that third one is a Mr. Negative deck. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What matters is I thought, okay, I've been like the deck that I felt like the meta assigned me to was one of them that I mentioned in my Sam Wilson deck, my Sam Wilson Captain America video. Not the Sarah Onslaught Tribunal deck, but the one with Spectrum, the first one I shared that includes cards like Armor and Miss Marvel. The Miss Marvel Spectrum Sam Wilson Captain America deck. That deck actually does really well, and it's fun to play, so I don't necessarily have a problem with that. However, when I want to go switch it up, I'll play a different deck, and I get stomped on. And then I go back to that deck, and I win again. And it's not 100%, but as an example, I went to play Mr. Negative deck, and I could not draw Mr. Negative. Just couldn't draw him. And yeah, I won here or there, but it was much harder, and I just could not draw Mr. Negative, so I began to keep track. For 15 games in a row, I could not draw Mr. Negative before turn 5, which is just crazy to me. And I don't know, like maybe it's me just shaking my fist at the air and being like, oh, game, you've screwed me over. It's just something eerily weird about feeling like if I go outside of the deck that the meta has assigned me to play, the RNG, the location disruption, the counters that my opponent draws perfectly on time just shut me down so hard that like it doesn't feel like it feels like the game is preventing me from playing. It is a weird feeling. It's very frustrating. And so my experience, the reason that I bring this up now is because I was so excited to play Bounce again. I love Bounce. And even if I was going to lose, Joaquin Torres was an excuse to play. And I just could not get the card draw ever. The amount of times that I started with my hand full of Toxin, Beast, Falcon, Joaquin Torres, and not a single 1-drop. I'd get Black Swan down on 2, and my first 1-drop would show up on like turn 3. And then I couldn't bounce them, and the tempo was just off. And then I'd never see Hitmonkey. In fact, I played a Hitmonkey deck and never played Hitmonkey a single time because it just never worked out. It's very disheartening. It's very sad. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this. This is like the first time I felt this way in Marvel Snap, but it feels like the meta has assigned me something that I have to obey, or the RNG just punishes me, which is it's really sad. Like it doesn't feel like, oh, this deck isn't as competitive, this deck isn't as meta, because that's true with Bounce. Like you gotta try harder, you gotta be a little bit more successful than you have to be in another deck. Like the combos really, really have to work out with Bounce. And it's not that. I've dealt with that before. I've took multiple different Bounce decks to Infinite. I've beat Conquest multiple times with, not Infinity Conquest, but Gold Conquest, many, many times with different Bounce decks. However, this doesn't feel like Bounce struggling the way it does. It truly feels like I'm being punished by the meta and RNG. It's a very frustrating feeling. So let me know if anyone else has that. However, I have here on my list that Thanos might be a super interesting place to try Joaquin Torres. I have a Thanos deck that I haven't been playing a lot lately, but in the past it's done really good for me. And I need deck space, but for some reason I like hold on to that Thanos deck even though I don't play it. So maybe I should put Joaquin there and give it a try. Maybe I will, but if I can get a video out before his time in the Spotlight cache is over, maybe we'll make a video about it. I thought Thanos could be interesting. So after that little bit of a rant, sorry for that sidetrack, made the video longer than it needed to be. Do I think Joaquin Torres is worth your resources? This of all of them is really, 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 really hard. It is a strong maybe. but I can give a firm recommendation if you end up in the yes or no camp. I think for a lot of people, the answer is simply no. I think for the people who are interested in playing bounce, not just right now, but you feel like, hey, bounce is a cool archetype. I want to play bounce. I want to play bounce in the future. I think Joaquin Torres is worth getting. And here's the reason why. The Spotlight Week is not horrible. You have Makari and you have Nomura. Two cards that I feel like a lot of people sleep on, and I personally believe are worth having in your collection. So as far as keys go, it's not the worst week to spend your keys. It's a pretty good gamble. Joaquin Torres is much better to get with your key than it is to spend 6,000 tokens on. Because Joaquin Torres is not great right now. I think he's going to be great later when we get a buff, when we get another card that fits in bounce. Something along those lines, Joaquin Torres is going to be better. And you're going to wish that you had him if bounce is an archetype that you want to play. Similar to how so many people, when Victoria Hand was popping up, they're like, wow, or when Bullseye was going crazy, wow, I wish I had Thena. I wish I wouldn't have skipped on Thena. Joaquin Torres is going to have that same effect when something, that little nudge that bounce needs to get more competitive, when that happens and you're interested in playing bounce, you'll wish you had Joaquin Torres. And spending 6,000 tokens on him is going to feel pretty bad because he doesn't feel like a 6,000 tokens card. He feels like a card that you should have spent your keys on. So if you are in that camp, you want to play bounce, and you've got the keys to spend, I think he's worth it. I struggle to recommend that you spend 6,000 tokens on him because I think tokens are more valuable. But this Spotlight Week is not bad to me. If you're not interested in bounce, or you're only like slightly interested in bounce, spend your resources somewhere else. If you're slightly interested in bounce, and when that one card or that buff happens to a bounce card and makes it a little bit more competitive, you can certainly make a competitive bounce deck without Joaquin. And still, get in on the hype temporarily until the meta changes again. So if you're just going with the flow of the meta, you don't need him. But if when that time comes and bounce is like your thing, you'll wish you had him. So hopefully that helps you decide if he is worth your resources. I would love to know your thoughts on being cursed by RNG, or being like, I truly feel like the meta, I've been meta assigned. It's very, very eerie feeling. Anyway. Let me know. I appreciate all of you watching. If you made it this far and you're still listening and you have the time, I would ask that you leave a like on the video. If you are so inclined, leave a comment. Those types of things genuinely help so much with the YouTube algorithm, helps the video perform, helps more people know if Joaquin Torres is worth their keys in the final moments. And if you are here and haven't subscribed, I would appreciate your subscription. It means a lot. But nonetheless, I am so thankful for you watching, no matter who you are or where you are. Thanks for watching. That was a cheesy end, but I mean it.